outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio for a special pop-up interview with Kristina Kallas, who is the Minister for Education and Research in the Republic of Estonia. Kristina, how are you this morning?
Thank you very much. I'm good. How are you?
Excellent. Not too bad. We are going to talk this morning about lots of things when it comes to Estonian education. I'm really looking forward to it. We're going to talk about how the Estonian education system functions for teachers, for students, in the classrooms, the school environments, lots of things. And I'm really, really excited. So let's dive in, Kristina. Before we get going, do you want to just briefly tell people a little bit more about your remit and your role, just so people understand what exactly that is?
Yes. Okay. I think especially for the UK listeners, I should put things maybe into perspective regarding the numbers, because Estonia is a country that is extremely small. It's not even a small country on a European size, because European size small country is approximately 8 million population. We are actually a micro country. We have the population only of 1.3 million. And the number of students at schools is 170,000 students and 17,000 teachers. So it's very, very tiny. It's, I think, in size slightly bigger than Iceland, but we are the two smallest European education systems. And maybe in this context, by being extremely small and extremely tiny, actually, a relatively new education system when it comes to the age, because Estonia has been independent again 34 years only. We have a dual language system in education. So that's another issue. We have Estonian language schools and we have Russian language schools. And Russian language schools are the inheritance of Soviet time occupation. And we are currently in a process where we are trying to integrate those two school systems into one unified school system. It's been going very long. For 34 years since the collapse of the Soviet Union, we have been trying to put the Russian schools into Estonian education system. It's been very difficult, very challenging, but we are in a last phase of that reform. And now if you think about 17,000 teachers and 170,000 students, which are divided between Russian students and Estonian students and Russian teachers and Estonian teachers, then the Estonian system itself, Estonian language version of the system itself is even smaller. And considering that it's so small and it has so limited resources, being number one in Europe in output, meaning in PISA test is I think extremely significant, because usually the countries that are topping the PISA on the top are quite big, except Singapore, but Japan, Korea, they are large systems with a huge amount of resources that you can put into the system in order to build it strong. But we have just 500 schools. That's all we have, and a language that is not spoken by anybody outside of that system. So that means that we can't pool the resources from outside of Estonia for teaching, for example. We can only rely on our own national resources, because that's the language limit. The language sets the limitations to that, including also textbooks, materials, all the information that we're operating with in education system has to be in Estonian language. And in that sense, it's been always a challenge. So that's maybe just a context into when we operate. I mean, the size of Estonia is probably a size of a middle-sized English city somewhere in England.
Sure. Tell us a bit more about the PISA results, just in terms of what they've shown. Again, giving people a little bit of context here in terms of what they've shown for Estonia.
In last 2022 results, we were number one in Europe in all aspects, in functional reading, in mathematical thinking, and in science. and number 4 in the world after Singapore, Korea, and Japan. And we have been participating in PISA since 2006. So, and steadily just going up. So in 2006, we were around, I think, country around position of around 10th in Europe, in the world. And then we have been going constantly up, but not so much. In last PISA, we also had a drop in the numbers, in the results, caused by the pandemic, obviously. So pandemic has had a significant actually impact on learning outcomes of our generation, and I think we should be all fair and kind of say it out loudly that there is a generation. They are 15 and 16-year-olds today who have been impacted negatively by the COVID, by the 3 years of pandemic. And this PISA showed this. Differently from many countries in Europe, our PISA results did not drop that drastically due to the COVID. And I think the reason behind that, there are many. Maybe during the podcast today we can talk about the reasons why we think that Estonian drop was much smaller compared to many other countries. And there are teacher resource question, why the teachers in Estonia were much better adapted to changing the learning practices in classroom when the COVID happened. And second, the technological preparedness of the schools to actually go from in-class teaching into online teaching. And that's also something where Estonia, not knowing the pandemic will happen, but being ready for other trends in a society, actually we're more ready, I think, for the pandemic, because we had an infrastructure there that allowed us to switch very quickly from in-class teaching into online teaching.
Sure. I mean, we're going to touch on lots of things. I mean, I'm going to really enjoy sort of digging into the mobile phone stuff, the technology stuff, the AI stuff. So we'll definitely come on to that later on. What I wanted to start with is just some of the basics around the system. So the first one I was interested in is how you become a teacher in Estonia and how long it takes and what routes you have for somebody to go into teaching.
Mm-hmm. It takes 5 years. So it's 3 years of undergraduate bachelor studies and then 2 years postgraduate master studies. So to be a teacher, you have to have a master's degree. And there are 2 routes to go there. One route is to go into pedagogical masters. So you can study pedagogical bachelor and pedagogical masters. So do the full 5-year circle of pedagogy studies. Or you can do some other subject bachelor. For example, you do English bachelor, and then you go into masters and do English teaching masters. So this is another route. And the third route actually is that you do masters only in English without pedagogical qualifications. You obtain a master's degree in English philology, for example, and then you go to work in school. And after 1 year in school, you can go and do the pedagogical examination or certification of your pedagogical qualifications. So, but that requires at least 1 year of teaching in school. So there are 3 ways of entering, but the base level for entering teaching profession is master's degree. So you have to have a postgraduate degree.
Okay. And once you finish that, and that master's degree, correct me if I'm wrong, within that 5-year program, 2 out of those 3 routes would be non-subject specific. It's literally a 5-year program for teaching, and then one of those options was a subject specific one. Or correct me if I'm wrong on that one.
No, all the tracks are subject specific. So if you enter a bachelor in pedagogy, you choose which subject teacher you are going to become. If you enter regular bachelor,
that's at the beginning of the 5-year process.
Yes. So we mostly focus on training subject teachers. Plus, there is a so-called class teacher, and class teacher is a teacher that teaches grade 1 to grade 6. So this is a separate teaching category of teachers, which we call, actually it's a primary school teacher. Let's put it in English, maybe it's better to category. It's a primary school teacher. And then, But then post-primary teachers are all subject teachers. So they study specific subject at the university, whether this is English, math, physics. And then in addition, when they enter master's level, they do pedagogical courses. So they do a lot of pedagogy and psychology their study.
What are the incentives to get into teaching? Are there any? Do you need any in your system? I mean, we'll talk a little bit in a bit about sort of, you know, the wider public perception of teachers, because I want to get into that in a bit as well. But yeah, just in terms of teachers, have you got any sort of crisis like the UK has in terms of getting people into it and keeping people in it?
Oh yeah, I think every country has a crisis, because there are very few countries, if any, that have a load of unemployed teachers. I mean, we don't have unemployed teachers who would be looking for work, which means that everybody who has a teacher qualifications and has studied to become a teacher is employed. So there is no unemployment among the teachers, which means that this is a university degree that guarantees you a job. So this is something that you should not be worried that you will be unemployed. The problem with this is that, as any other public sector job, it's relatively low paid compared to the private sector. So whether this is doctors, nurses, teachers, policemen, they are all relatively low paid. I mean, I can't say low paid, but they are hovering around average salary compared to private sector that can offer much higher than average salary. So what we have a problem in Estonia, we have a very high qualification requirements for the teaching job, which is master's degree. And if you have a master's degree in Estonia in pedagogy at the university, you have studied to become a teacher, your qualifications are so high that with those qualifications, you could possibly work in many private companies as a middle level manager or even higher level manager, like a team manager. It's teaching profession gives you a team management competencies, and lots of private companies I see are hiring our master's graduates from pedagogical faculty to be, for example, in Uber-like companies, in startup companies, to be team managers, account managers.
Quite quickly after starting?
Very quickly, right from the university, because the teachers at the university study psychology, which is a human psychology. They study communication, they study project management, they study team building. So, and these are exactly the skills that are required if you want to work in a private industry as a team manager or some mid-level manager. So we see a lot of people who are graduating master's degree in pedagogy entering straight into the private sector.
Wow.
and being very valued and paid very highly. So the question is the pay, obviously, for the teachers. But what makes maybe the teacher job attractive in Estonia, why people are still entering this, is that first of all, it's highly prestigious to be a teacher. It's honored in a community if you're a teacher. So you do a job that actually community members consider very valuable. And second, I think, is that it gives you a lot of autonomy, professional autonomy. So what is attractive for young people is that they can make the decisions and they can design their own teaching practices, and they can design their own career paths at the education system. So the more autonomous the education system is, the more it is attractive for young people to come and try out themselves.
You mentioned that perception in the community of teachers being valuable. So just, is there any way you can translate that into what that actually looks and feels like? Does it mean less sort of parental complaints? You know, like what does it translate into? Does it literally just blanket everything?
Well, parents, we are in a generation of parents who are much more who are consuming much more information than any previous generation have consumed. They are already the generation that is very good at consuming information because they partly grew up in information age. So they are very fast in consuming information. They want to participate. They want to have an opinion. They want to have being involved. So that creates a different pressure to the teaching profession compared to the previous generations that had much less information and were much less involved in what was happening in the school. Sure. So this is a reality that teachers all globally have to cope with, is much more informed and engaged parents. But the teacher profession position, or so to say, kind of a high prestige of that profession, I think comes from the it plays out in the situations where I don't think that the parents argue with teachers that much. They argue with the system, with politicians about the education, but not so much directly, immediately with teachers. And if teachers argue with politicians as well, and they do, the parents tend to always take the teacher's side. It's never, so it's always on the teacher, because the teacher is trusted so much more than any politician or any mayor of the city or a head of the village. So if you have an argument between a teacher and a minister, there is the whole society takes always a teacher's side. So in this sense, it's because they're trusted. Strange. They are trusted more. They are trusted more, and there is so much more trust in the teaching profession. And I think it's a historical, because our nation, our very small nation, was created by the teachers, by the schoolmasters. So if you have every nation have their founding fathers and founding mothers. In case of America, that was lawyers and tradesmen. In case of Estonia, it was schoolmasters, headmasters, principal teachers. They were the ones who were founding fathers and mothers of Estonian nation. So going against them is not recommended for any politician to do.
That is so interesting. Oh, it's really interesting. Okay, so let's imagine I'm a teacher. I've done my 5-year master's. I've gone into the school, right? And I understand you put, so what you're really saying is a key reason why teachers in Estonia might leave is to do with salary compared to private sector. But what you've sort of intimated is that in terms of the conditions and the way that they actually work within schools, there's a lot of positivity there from what you've sort of said. And there's obviously security there as well in the job, and you can get a job and so on. But I wanted to ask, when they get into the school, my part A question is, in Estonian high schools, let's take that as an example. So secondary schools for children, say 11 upwards, or what? Yeah. What sort of, because in Britain, we have usually have quite big layers of management within those schools. So we might have, for example, a head teacher, a deputy head teacher, and then say 4, 5, 6, even 7 or 8 assistant head teachers to the deputy and the head. And then under that, we might have our subject leaders. So our head of history, head of English, who then might manage the actual teachers within that section. So just broadly speaking, I'm wondering if there's any difference there in Estonia within the schools, because I know in countries like France, there's less of those layers.
Well, we have a very different size of the schools. So we have high schools that have 1,000 students, and then we have high schools that have 40 students. Wow. So it's, yes, I think average is 200. So it's a small country with a small schools. So you don't need so many layers. So you have much less layers. But the schools that are in the capital city and that have 1,000 students, I think they have definitely more than one assistant head teacher, because you just need to handle the number of students. But it's not, I think we have only 4 or 5 high schools that have more than 1,000 students all over the country. So most of them are much smaller. So you have, because the schools are smaller, you have smaller layers of administrative tasks to do. Yeah.
Sure. And in terms of the teachers themselves, in terms of the contact time versus non-contact time. So in you know, in Britain, we call it PPA, like free periods, and a number of periods where a teacher gets to not be in contact with the children. I'm wondering if you knew any sort of broad percentages on that, or how that works in Estonia, and what the teachers actually get within their days in terms of there's some time to help plan and do things.
Yeah, but it's in Estonia, it's non-regulated. We have not nationally regulated contact time, neither any of the other type of the regulations. The only thing that is regulated by the law is a teacher work time is 35 hours per week. So she's working, or he's working 5 hours less than the average work contract. And recommendation is that within this 35 hours of working time, there should be 21 contact hours, not more, because if it's more, then usually teacher have less time for the other responsibilities, but it's not a heavily regulated. So because the schools are so different, as I said, we have high schools with 1,000 students and then high schools with 40 students. You have a different type of teachers that you need for those different type of schools, and different type of assignments and tasks that need to be done. So within one school, you can have one teacher that does only contact hours, because maybe she's absolutely fantastic in didactical work in mathematics, and she does the mathematical didactical work. And then you have another teacher who has much less direct contact hours, but who has a mathematical assistance job. So she works with the students not in directly contact hours, but some extra assignments, that extra students that need extra help. And so maybe she's more specialized on immigrant kids, mathematics, or the kids with educational special needs, mathematics. So it depends very much on the school. So
would they both be employed as mathematics teachers?
Yes.
In those two examples. So it would be up to the school. The school could say, the teacher could say to the school, I'm better at this. And the school might say, you are better at this. Yes. So therefore you could be employed, and they could say, you're now going to be more working one-to-one, or you're going to be doing more marking and assessment, or you're going to be doing more planning and sort of thinking about it. And the other person's going to have more contact time.
Yes, exactly. So it's up to the school to decide. It's not, both of them are hired as mathematic teachers. Both of the job, the salary is all the same, but they have very different tasks, depending on their competencies, depending on their self-interest, like what they would want to do. There are some teachers who really want to do contact hours. They are good at didactics. They are good at getting there. And then there are some teachers who are much better at working on individual one-to-one teaching, small groups, doing project work, doing research projects with the students, but they would be the same category teachers. It's not a different categories of teachers.
But there's space within the system, it seems, to be able to do that. If there's a possibility for it, if there's two teachers entering a school, and there's a possibility for one to have less contact, significantly less contact time. That's pretty impressive. In this,
but that's the autonomy. That's the autonomy of the school. Why would you need a school principal then, if the school principal can't decide such things? I mean, school principal has to be able to build her or his own team, and based on the way the specific needs of children. You have schools where you have no immigrant children almost at all, because they are somewhere in the rural areas where all kids are from the same rural community. All the parents, most of the parents have been going to the same school. You need one type of the team and one type of the assignments there. And then you have another school in a very big urban center where you have half of the students are immigrant background, or the other half of the students have some educational special needs. You need to arrange a completely different team, because you need a different type of teachers, different type of work that they need to do. Mm-hmm. And that's why you can't compare those two schools and say that they have to be employed the same way, all the teachers. They can't employ the same way, because the kids are different, and the kids need different. The kids have different needs.
That's really interesting. Okay, let's move on to sort of what happens in the classroom then. So what pedagogical approaches do you think are most valued or promoted in the Estonian education system?
We have had this 10 years now, this transition from teacher-led or frontal teaching into the learner-focused teaching. I think we are somewhere in the mixed process right now, because as I said to you also in an example of mathematics, some of the teaching takes place in a frontal way where the teacher is explaining something to the class of 40 students for 45 minutes. And then some other teaching.
Students.
Well, I think one lesson is usually 45 minutes.
Sorry, I thought you meant 40 students, not the,
No, in high school it could be 40 students, but in primary school it's 24 is a maximum.
So maybe in the high school context, it would be more like a teacher doing a lecture with 40 students, and then they might have another session with a different maths teacher doing more exploratory project-based. Right.
And the same might happen in primary school, that one teacher is doing just more like a lecture type, and then other teachers are doing, or the same teacher is doing other learning sessions which are differently designed. So she can combine lecture plus group work plus individual assignments. So it's a combination, it's a mixture of various techniques. What we don't want to do is only lectures, because that's not what works. And much more individualized approach is needed. And we are, I think all of us in England, in Estonia, are moving step by step into more individualized learning paths for kids. And for that, we also need to use more and more technology, because technology allow us to make those learning paths is much more individualized and much more diverse. And but this frontal teaching, lecture style teaching, which used to be the mainstream teaching in education system for last 200 years, it's still there. I think it still has its place there, but it has a limited scope for the learner. But it doesn't mean that it's completely unnecessary. I think it's still there, but it can't take 100% of the learning and teaching time.
Got you. But would you say that I mean, in terms of that project-based learning, would you say there is a general preference? I mean, you almost said that, but there's a general preference towards that, and you're trying to do more of that?
We try to do both. I'm still stressing that both are needed, and teachers are autonomous in deciding their learning and teaching approaches. So it's not that we prescribe anything. There is a teacher training where we of course teach certain preferences in terms of what works with what age group and how. But the teacher has to be the one who understands that if she or he teaches 7-year-olds or 17-year-olds, then what's the difference there? How much of this frontal lecture type teaching can you use with a 7-year-old, and how much you can use this with a 17-year-old? And the same is with the technology. Now, when we go and talk with you about mobile phones, I think the teacher is the one who actually knows the best how much of the technology could be integrated into teaching and learning for 7-year-olds, and how much of it can be done for 17-year-olds. By setting strict limits to what the teacher can or cannot do in the classroom is taking away the autonomy, professional autonomy of the teacher to have the competencies to decide actually about this. It's and that's what I think, why I think that this is not actually something right to do to me as a minister, who I don't know who are the kids in the class. I've never met those children. I've never been in contact with those children. And I make the decision saying that you can't use this or that tool to work with them. I don't think that that's really something that helps the teacher. What helps the teacher is to train her in what works and what does not work with a 7-year-old in the classroom. When you want to teach them math or reading or biology. Well, 7-year-olds don't teach biology, but...
Sure. But in terms of teaching approaches, in one school of average size of 200 or whatever, you could have one teacher doing things in quite a very different way to the teacher in the next classroom from a teaching approach point of view, and there wouldn't be any problem with that. That would be yeah, this is completely normal because teacher A wants to do it that way and teacher B wants to do it that way.
Absolutely. As long as it's pedagogically sound, and as long as a teacher can explain how, with these methods, the teacher is reaching the learning outcomes, that's the teacher's discretion to decide how she is teaching, or he. Yeah.
Sure. Oh, really interesting. And what about behaviour in Estonian schools then? Obviously in Britain there's been lots of headlines in the last particularly since COVID, lots of headlines around teacher abuse, teacher assaults, numerous surveys that have been done by unions in the UK seeing rises in these things across the board. So have you seen rises in the same things? Have or are things pretty much as they are? What sort of challenges do you see there for teachers in Estonia?
Not that I know about the rise of violence or teacher abuse. It has not been reported, so it's not that I have heard about it. The COVID impact has rather been on the mental health of the children. Children have more challenges of dealing with anxiety, mostly with anxiety, and also with missing school. So more kids have been more often missing the school. So the impact of COVID was that children suddenly realized that you don't need to go necessarily to school to study. And so showing up in the morning has become an issue in Estonia as well. But not the violence or abuse of teachers. That's not something that I have heard of. I've been a minister for 2 years, so it's not on the table.
I mean, do you think that whole thing of what you were saying earlier about the value, the prestige, the sort of view of teachers within the societal framework, do you think that's also ties in with the behaviour of students, because they might, their parents see it that way, so therefore a lot of them might see it that way, sort of thing?
I think that's one thing, but the other thing is that to maintain that prestige of the teacher, teacher needs to have rights. So what my main feeling after 2 years of having experience with my European colleagues is that in a situation where teacher has no right to discipline the classroom because all her behavioral rights are prescribed from top above. You can do this, you can do this, but you can't do this, and this. And she's just showing up in the classroom mere as serving the rules. She's there to enforce the rules that is not established by her, that is established by somebody else. So she's just a clerk who just does an assignment. And that's very different understanding of a teacher who is a professional who comes to class to teach and handles the classroom herself rather than just follows the instructions. And if the teacher has a right to handle the classroom herself and set the rules in the classroom and saying, my rules in my classroom are this, are that, you give the authority to the teacher by allowing her to set the rules in the classroom, by allowing her to decide whether she can use mobile phone, by allowing her to decide whether she allows to take in mobile phone into the classroom in the first place. If she has a right to decide that, then she sets her authority in the classroom. So she decides how the learning in the classroom takes place. And usually what in Estonia happens is that teachers negotiate those rules with parents. They say that in my classroom, the rules are like this. And if they negotiate those rules with parents, the parents become teammates of the teachers in enforcing those rules because they're usually negotiated with the parents. If the system operates that the minister sent the regulation and everybody has to follow, it's non-negotiable. You don't negotiate this, and you don't. The enforcement of those rules usually becomes an issue because sending from top down the rules, the parents will protest. They say that they disagree. Nobody talked to me. Why I'm not involved? Why can't I decide? The students will protest because they say that why I didn't decide, I couldn't participate. And the teacher is not actually even believing in those rules because she didn't participate in the process of designing those rules either. So, and that in this situation, nobody owns the rules. And if nobody owns the rules, then they are not going to be enforced the way they are meant to, and they are not going to work. So that's why I strongly believe in teacher autonomy, allowing the teacher to own the rules that she sets in the classroom or in the school, or the school to set the rules by the teachers, all the teachers together in the school, and that will be enforced. I mean, I have a personal experience. Maybe I take you time for 5 more minutes. I have 3 kids. They're all in school, and my youngest kid ended up studying in a classroom which had a serious disciplinary problems, because some of the children had behavioral issues where it's not physical violence or abuse of teachers, but the concentration, anxiety, disturbing the lessons, not following the teacher's instructions, not capable of working in a group, and so on. And for many years, this continued until parents really became anxious and threatened to take their kids out of the school, saying that this class is not functional, it doesn't operate properly. So what the school did was that the school had several rounds of meetings with parents, and with the university, consulted with university professors, and proposed a set of rules, saying that the behavior rules in these classrooms are like this and this. They installed a separate teacher who was dealing with those rules. And on parental meeting, this was finally agreed on everybody, that these are the rules that we will follow next academic year. And we started following them. And I see how the parents are enforcing those rules, actually, because these rules were agreed with parents together. So on the school level, nobody asked minister to get involved or ministry to set some regulations like what in this kind of situation school should do or school should not do, allowed, not allowed. Nobody waited for the ministry to do anything. Ministry was not involved at all. It was only the school level. And I think that's what works. It works on the school level, on the teacher level. So pedagogical and disciplinary behavioral decisions need to be made closest to the child level, and that's teacher, and that's the school principal level.
And just flipping from that, then, what's the sort of inspection system like then in Estonia? What's the sort of way in which schools are moderated or inspected? I mean, obviously in England we have something called Ofsted. Wales has something called Estyn. And they visit schools on a cycle, usually for 2 or 3 days. In Ofsted's case, and then they make a series of sort of judgments on the school, not necessarily individual teachers, but obviously the individual teachers can contribute to that. Departments might be mentioned, subjects might be mentioned within the reports, and we've just flipped to sort of or England has flipped to a report card system where there's I think it's 7 or 8 different sections, and then it's like a school report card for the school, for the teachers in the school. So, many people in England would see that as, quite high stakes. There are others who say, yeah, we absolutely need this and we're on board with it. There are many others who say it's really damaging. So I wondered what in Estonia the situation with that side of things is.
We don't have school inspectorate. We have a department in the ministry that consists of, I think, 17 people that do sometimes school inspections, and they can be done on 2 legal bases. One basis is severe complaint coming from any of the stakeholders. Could be parents, could be teachers, could be school owner asking for the inspection. But that has to be like a grounded, severe complaint, not just complaining that I don't like my teacher. There has to be some really legal basis for us to interfere with an inspection that something really happened. Sometimes, for example, when child suicide happens, we go to school and to inspect what were the causes and whether the school used all the precautionary measures to avoid or prevent that. So it has to be very severe severe issue. And the second way that this department works is when the minister sometimes sets thematical inspections. For example, we have been doing now for 3 years thematical inspections of the Russian schools, just to see they have to transit in a last phase into Estonian language of instruction. to see what are the language skills of the teachers, how is the school preparing for the transition into Estonian language of instruction, whether they are following the legal requirements of teaching in Estonian. And that's a thematic inspections that minister signs off and says that in a limited period of time we will have a monitoring of those schools. So these are the only things that we do. And most of the management, or let's say monitoring of the schools, come out through the learning outcomes based on a curricula. So schools have to provide results at the 9th grade, at the end of the 9th grade, when they are graduating. The 16-year-olds are graduating with the exit exams, and they have to show that they have reached the learning outcomes. And the schools that are performing below learning outcomes, these schools will be scrutinized separately, not by the ministry, but by the school owners. It could be private owners or municipal owners, or if they are state schools, then they are monitored by the state schools. But we don't have this kind of...
It's like a peer review.
No.
So if that happens, it's more like a peer review.
Yes,
one school
it's more like a peer review.
The other school sort of thing. What? I mean, you mentioned outcomes, exams. I mean, do you have, when we have GCSEs at the end of 16, we have A levels, 16 to 18?
Yes, they are exit exams. 16-year-old exit exams in math, in Estonian, and in elective, mostly it's English language.
Right.
But they could be chemistry or anything else. And in math and in Estonian, 16-year-olds, they have a threshold. They have to reach 50% of the exam results. So anybody who does below 50% has to either repeat the exam or do an extra year of learning to actually
do the year again. Yeah,
like
resit year. Okay, well, listen, we could dig into that for ages, but we haven't got the time. So I want to move on now to some very eye-catching sort of comments you've made recently around mobile phones in schools. Because in Britain, it's an issue that really stokes up some strong views, right? So what is the policy on mobile phones in Estonian schools? Because I mean, based on what you've said previously, I think I know what you're going to say in terms of autonomy, but what's the policy? What's the outlook on mobile phones from you? What's the sort of ministerial position? What's the government position on mobile phones in schools? That's what I'm interested in.
Yes, I mean, it might sound now everything like counterintuitive and like a negligence, but I start from the first point. Mobile phones. Usage of the mobile phones for entertainment and gaming purposes can be damaging to children, especially in the early developmental phases of their brain. So nobody argues that's scientifically proven. Children at the age of 7, 6, and so on, if they are spending too much time on gaming, that is stimulating their brain differently than what they need when they're developing. That should be said first. Yeah. Now, lots of life of us adults is around the mobile phones. We do everything on the mobile phones. Mm-hmm. We pay our bills, we transfer money, we check the bus schedules, we send emails, we communicate with people, we arrange meetings, everything. In Estonia, we vote. So there's a lot of things, everything in your life, and especially in our country, which is 100% digital governance country, everything literally is on your mobile phone. Now, these two things, using mobile phone for your life and for handling your life and having things done, and second thing, using them for your addictions and negative things, these are all in one device, but they are different purposes. It's a little bit like talking about the knife. When humankind invented knife, you could kill somebody with this. But you can also build a house. You can cut a loaf of bread. So humans evolved much faster once they actually invented knife, because that helped them to build much stronger houses and much more resilient life. They could cut and grow things that they couldn't do before. So the same with the mobile phones. They are not negative per se. It's the way we use them and what we are using them for that matters. Now, the school is a place where one has to learn to use various tools that you use in life. You have to use pen and paper, you have to use calculator, you have to learn to use all other mathematical tools that I don't even know how they are called in English, that you learn to use in math class. And that's why you have to learn to use mobile phones and how you use them for learning purposes, the learning purposes. And that's why we don't have national ban on the mobile phones. We don't do that. We want to train teachers in terms of how the mobile phones can be used for learning purposes. We want to teach them in competencies regarding different age and different development of psychology of the children of different age, because there is a difference between 17-year-old and 7-year-old. And we want the teachers to enforce the rules of usage of the mobile phones in the school by themselves. And again, if the teachers do it on school level, then they negotiate this with the parents, and usually negotiated rules are enforced together. And I see this all over Estonia, that most of the schools have negotiated the rules, have set the rules, and have enforced them, and mobile phones are very specifically regulated on a school level. We don't see a need for the national ban for that, and we actually want teachers, especially in high school and also on lower secondary level, to use mobile phones for the teaching and learning purposes in specific tasks and specific learning assignments that they need to develop the skills. I mean, when we talk about media literacy, how do you learn media literacy without mobile phones? How does that happen? Theoretically on paper and pen, or with a PowerPoint presentation in the classroom? No, you need a phone. You need a phone in the classroom so that the teacher can use exercises, examples, texts on the phone to teach the media literacy, for example.
I understand. So that's really interesting. So what you're saying is you're sort of pro mobile phones being used in the classroom by teachers and students at sort of high school level, with regards to teaching and learning. You know, you haven't got any sort of, I mean, for example, there was some research that was done. Don't ask me who did it, because I can't get it off the top of my head, but it was like saying that basically if you have a mobile phone in a room and it's turned off, it'll in a corner, it would still cause more distraction by having it in the room for a student, because they'd be thinking about the presence of the phone. And then obviously if you turn it on and put it under the desk, it goes up a bit. If you have it on the desk, it goes up a bit. And if you're using it, it goes up a bit. So I guess, you know, where do you see it in terms of student distraction? Do you see that as something that needs to be managed, and they need to learn to do that with themselves?
Yes. They need to learn that. Their brain needs to learn to handle the distraction. This is a human evolution that we all need to go through. This technology is here to stay. It's not going to disappear. We have to learn to handle it, because if we ban it in school, it doesn't mean that they don't use it after the school hours. And there is also research that shows that if you ban it in school completely, you have more excessive usage in after hours. So the usage time will be just transferred from the school to the after hours. But the key is not to transfer from one place to the other. The key is to teach them to handle it. How do you handle the distraction? How do you deal with it? And I think that's important in the school as well as at home.
And technology in the classroom, is that quite prominent as well, just in general? You know, I know we talked a little bit about AI as well, but you know, where does that fit in? Is that a big thing in Estonia and schools and teaching? Is it becoming bigger?
We have given to teachers the tools. We have given them competencies. We have trained them extensively on digital competencies. But teachers are free to decide how they teach, whether they include technology, whether they don't include the technology. It's a teacher's decision. And we see that in 60% of the cases, teachers are using it in the classroom. In 40%, they use something else. So we don't have this political instruction that please use laptops or you have to use iPads or laptops. No, they don't have to. They are given those tools. They're provided, but it's a teacher's decision when, how, and why, for what kind of learning outcome the teacher is using those tools. And this has proven actually good, because the main key to us is teacher competence. This teacher needs to be competent in using this. And that's what proved in pandemic. When pandemic happened, two things in Estonian level. First, schools were very autonomous, very quickly, overnight, to make the decision how they change their operational practices. They didn't have to wait for the minister to send an instructions. What can you do now when the classrooms are closed and how you teach? Next morning, all the schools held the teacher meeting, decided that that's how they will continue teaching, and then went on. So the school interruption was very minimal. And the second, teachers had the digital competencies. They knew how they will be able to teach online and what learning actually is possible to do and what learning is not possible to do when the online teaching happens. I think the biggest problem with the pandemic was that teachers continued teaching online as if they taught in the same way as they taught in class.
Yeah, of course.
That's not possible. The assignments that teachers were giving to students doing at home were the same assignments that they were doing with those kids at class, and that's not the same thing. So kids were not able to do those assignments at home. So the main difference maybe from Estonia was that Estonia actually taught teachers, and they knew what kind of assignments are actually possible to give kids at home. And they have to be different from what you have given them once they were in the classroom. So I think that's the key. Train your teachers on digital competencies, that they would know that, okay, this assignment for that learning outcome, I have to do in the class, in the group work with a pen and paper. And this assignment for that learning outcome, I can use digital tool, because that's the learning what happens with that assignment. So this is the key here, I believe.
And what about ChatGPT, actual large language models? I mean, in terms of teachers using things like that and maybe students using them, I mean, what's your position on that?
Well, we have now negotiated with OpenAI into designing a specific prompted version for Estonian high schools of ChatGPT education version. And we want the teachers to, we are training the teachers. We did first training session in May. We will be doing the second training session in August for all the high school teachers. And starting from the September, they will receive the licenses of OpenAI education version, this specific prompted version for Estonia. And they will be free to use this, and all the teachers and all the students will receive the licenses. And they will be free to use this in their tasks. They don't have to. So again, it's a teacher's decision. But they will receive licenses and they will receive training so that they would know what are the opportunities and what are the limits and what are the risks of using ChatGPT in school, in teaching.
Would that be mainly with regards to their planning and their sort of...
No.
Or are we talking about in the classroom?
No, we are talking about the assignments as well, not just planning, but specific assignments that the students can do. Because the crucial for us is that students also need to learn what the large language models are, what they do, what they don't do, when they are biased, when they are hallucinating. Actually, the skill about the knowledge about LLM is as important as the knowledge about using LLM. So I think that's what we want the high school students to learn, to know what they are, what their limits are, what the risks are, and to use them for learning as well.
Do you know if with your European counterparts, are you one of the only countries doing that? I mean, is that something that you think?
So far, as far as I know, we are the only one. But many countries are looking at us and seeing how is it going to go.
Because I was going to say that's a really big move, right?
Yes, it is big move. It's very fast, because the decision was made in February and we have to be ready by September. So our researchers and technology company experts are working now the whole summer very intensively to prepare the pilot program for schools and for teachers.
Yeah, wow, that's going to be really interesting. So, yeah, wow. So yeah, I mean, it's very interesting because in Britain, like I say, there's a real movement away from technology, and well, I'll say technology certainly away from mobile phones. There's maybe a bit of a backlash also towards AI, sort of there simmering, under the surface as well. I mean, do you anticipate that most parents are going to be on board with this in Estonia? Are they sort of saying this is a great idea? It's progressive. We're going to lead the way. We need to get on board.
Most parents are on board with that. I haven't heard any objections. And actually, the mobile phone debate is not as intensive in Estonia as it is in other countries. It's almost, I would say, actually non-existent debate. So parents, because in most of the school levels that has been enforced with the parents' consent and parents' participation. So there's nothing to debate because on school level that has been decided already, and there is no fight with politicians. I mean, I personally actually think that politicians should keep away from pedagogical decisions as far as possible. It's not a political decision. Political decisions concern only financing and setting the legal framework equal for all the schools to operate. But anything that comes to pedagogical content and methodological issues, curriculum, I don't think that politicians should be too close to those decisions. They should be far away from those decisions.
Oh, Kristina, it's like there's some stark differences here. Okay, we're finishing off because we're running out of time. But I wanted to ask you to sort of finish off. What do you think the UK could learn? You've mentioned your PISA results. Obviously, you said they're outstanding. They're right up there. So what do you think the UK could learn from Estonia's education system? And also conversely, are there any, there might not be, but are there any elements of the UK's approach that you've sort of seen from a distance and thought, I quite like that?
I always recommend to trust the teachers and to put the system trust onto the teachers. But that means also investing into their education, into their professional training, and paying attention into their qualifications and stressing really this is two sides of the same coin. High-level requirements for teacher profession and qualification. And at the same time, if you set high-level requirements, allow them to use them and make the decisions. So don't over-regulate them. Because it's a little bit of like a game. You don't set very high requirements for the qualifications, and then you start regulating, controlling their work because the requirements are not so high. But then I think what works better is you have higher requirements for the job entry and less control and less regulation and more autonomy. So that would be my lesson from Estonian education system. High requirements, less control, and more autonomy to decide for the teachers. For the UK system, UK has done an actually impressive progress in PISA results in past 5 to 6 years. So obviously there have been something that you have done right in past around 6 years. And I think introducing sort of a national standard requirements for the learning outcomes and making sure that teachers are responsible for if the learning outcomes are not reached, then the teacher has to, you trust the teacher, but the teacher has to be accountable for the outcomes as well. I think that's also very, very good. But I need to know more about UK system in detail to be actually analyzing it more.
No, it's fantastic. Kristina, thank you ever so much. I've learned a huge amount through the conversation. It'll be interesting. Maybe in a year's time, we can have another conversation because I'd love to explore what's going to happen with the AI, that pathway that you're heading down. I'm sure many people in the UK would love to as well. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. And thank you to all our listeners who have joined in. If you've enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to like, subscribe, give us a shout out. And of course, a massive shout out to John Catt Educational, who support all our shows, including our specials on Teachers Talk Radio as our sponsor. Thank you, Kristina. Take care, everybody, and good morning to you.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model